Today, Brother Jimmy Votaw joins us from College Station, Texas. We'll get to hear about what quizzing was like in the 90s and how things have changed over the years. Jimmy also parents two current quizzers, so I'm excited to hear his advice on raising kids in quizzing from a young age. We will also be talking about the Texas Over the Hill tournament, junior question writing, and his annual Junior Interruption webinar. BQChats is on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. So if you guys like this content, please like and subscribe. If you guys are ready, here we go. Hey, Jimmy, how's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Wonderful. How's it down there in Texas right now?
It's good. Weather's good. Not too much rain right now. It has rained all winter long. Golf courses were closed for weeks at a time.
How much do you usually get out and golf?
I try to golf 2 to 3 times a week.
Oh, there you go. I'm not a golfer. Don't invite me to the range. I'll just embarrass myself. So you wear a lot of hats in the quiz community. You're a coach. You parent two awesome quizzer girls. You're a junior question writer. So tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in the quiz community.
Yeah, I have, like you said, I have 2 girls that are quizzers. They're 16 and 13 now. They started when they were 4 and 7, and so yeah, they've been doing it for a while. They're old pros, as you would say. And so that's awesome. It's awesome to be involved in that, daily. And then again at quiz practice, and so get to spend that time with them and spend it in the Word of God. So that's awesome. I do coach the intermediate team right now at our church, and so that's fun. And then I'm also the quiz director for our church as of this year. So I kind of oversee the quizzing program here in College Station at Victory, and we have teams in all 4 divisions. So that's exciting. Right now, our senior program, it needs to grow a little bit. The only senior quizzers we have at our church right now are my 2 girls, but I'm expecting some growth as these junior quizzers promote up. We got some pretty dedicated families down in our beginner and junior division.
That's what it takes.
Yep. And then, as you mentioned, I'm also a question writer for beginner and junior quiz tournaments, for the practice tournaments, really. Of course, Brother Marshall writes for extravaganza and district finals and nationals, but I write for a good portion of the monthly tournaments that other people go to, January, February, May, April tournaments.
Awesome. Well, so you're from Texas, College Station, right? Originally an Oklahoma guy.
I was born in Beaumont, Texas, so I'm originally a Texan. We moved to Oklahoma when I was 7, so I grew up in Oklahoma, and then about 2011, fall of 2011, we moved back, or I moved to College Station. So
Okie State or Oklahoma?
Oklahoma State.
Oklahoma State.
Cowboys. That's right.
All right, then you moved to College Station when?
In the fall of 2011, October of 2011.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, so Texas is kind of a unique district as far as the UPC, and that obviously flows into Bible quizzing. So explain the Texas districts, because how many districts are there?
I think there's 5 now.
There's 5. I only was aware of 4, so that's
right.
That's new to me. So how are the districts split up, and how has that changed since you've been there?
So back when I was a quizzer, it was Texas and Texaco. And Texaco is like West Texas and New Mexico. And that's all there was. And then over the last several years, the South Texas district has been formed. And then a few years ago, the North Texas district was formed, which is the Dallas area and over to Plano. South Texas was kind of a squiggly line from Houston over to Austin and down to San Antonio, Corpus Christi area. And Texas was basically East Texas and then kind of over into Central Texas. We're real close to the original line. We're a few miles from that original line here in College Station. And just last year at General Conference, they the South Texas district, I believe, split and made a South Central Texas district. So I'm not exactly sure what all that covers, but I do know that at nationals this year, especially in the junior quizzing, I haven't heard much about the senior, but at nationals this year, I know that there will be a South Texas and a South Central Texas, or South Texas teams and South Central Texas teams represented if they choose to go.
Wow, so that could actually potentially add more teams to the total. I mean, at least 2, right? I mean,
Right, at least 2 in
wow,
each division.
it just keeps growing. It's been amazing the numbers we've seen at juniors and seniors the last few years. Um, well, so speaking of being a quizzer, you mentioned it. You quizzed, was it 91 when you started?
Right, I quizzed from 91 to 96. So I got
91 to 96. You so that was a little bit different back then, right? So tell us about the good old days. How was quizzing back then?
So you hear the stories about, oh, we had to memorize 1,000 verses and et cetera, et cetera. Well, that was true, but fortunately, I think that stopped in 1990. I looked at the data today, and I think in 1990 there were 708 verses when they memorized, looks like, most of John. But 1991 was Pentecostal doctrine, and I don't remember a verse count because I didn't care. I just, quizzing, that sounds like fun. It was my first year. And since 1991, I think it's been around the same number that we have and experienced today, around that 500 plus mark. So it's stayed pretty consistent, I think, since that time. Now, there were a few years, it looks like, before 90, where there were less verses. Like, it looks like Romans was, or 1989 was Romans, and they did 433 verses.
Probably because of the tougher material.
Tougher material, right. Yeah. So, it's varied, but since about that time frame, I think it's been around that 500 to 550 mark.
Interesting. So, what is this I heard about starred verses?
So, my first year, 1991, there were not every verse could you ask a quote on. Only the ones that had stars or asterisks by them could a quote or quotation completion be asked. And so the rest of the verses, any question like we have today could be asked on it, but only the starred ones. Those starred ones, you really need to get them down word for word. So that was that was different. I think the very next year, and I don't know how far back that went, but it seems like in 92, 93, somewhere in that time frame. I don't know if it's just we started memorizing all the material on my team, or if that was when they changed it to anything could be a quote. Any verse that was covered could be a quote.
That would be a big difference nowadays. That would be interesting. So I think I like quotes on everything,
right?
Especially as a question writer, let me tell you.
Yeah. So back in the 90s, it was different. We had we didn't have the electronic buzzers that we have now. We had, and I've got it for you here today.
Oh, good.
We had.
Oh yeah, there it is. Now we actually, when I quizzed in 03, we had the box, but we did not have that thing right there.
The flat buzzers. Yeah.
Wow. So where did you have to put your hand?
This thing is probably as old as, well, it's definitely older than all the quizzers that are quizzing today. I bought it we bought it in the 90s. I didn't buy it. My parents bought it for me. But we bought it in the 90s, and it still works. We use it every month.
So where did your hand go, and what was your technique?
So your hand had to be flat on the table. That was the rule. Both hands had to be flat on the table. Now, obviously, they would make exceptions if, like, my friend broke his arm and was in a cast, and so he just had to, rest his cast up there couldn't hit the buzzer with that hand. He had to hit it with his other hand. He had to become left-handed. But so if I don't know what the best way to do this is on video. Your hand had to be flat on the table behind the buzzer. Now you could place the buzzer any way you wanted, at any angle. But whatever the closest angle was, or whatever the closest point of the buzzer was between that and the edge of the table closest to you, there was like an imaginary line drawn. So if you had it, I did a little drawing here.
Okay.
If you had it at an angle like this, then your hand had to be, all parts of your hand had to be behind this point here.
Okay.
And if you cross that imaginary line, you'd get a foul, 5-point foul.
So if you your hand hovered above the buzzer at all.
Oh yeah, if your hand was above the buzzer at all, you were getting a foul. But even if your finger was like above that line,
okay,
then you could get a foul as well.
Gotcha. And what is I heard a lot about duct tape.
Oh yeah, duct tape was, I mean, because you were slapping those buzzers and people did different things. I went with the sideways. I hit it with this point on my hand here, but other people, hit it with their fingertips or whatever. There were whole sessions based on where they talked about buzzer speed. In the quizzing kickoffs, they talked about buzzer speed and how to hit the buzzer and what the best technique was. So I remember Brother Walker coming to Oklahoma and doing a kickoff for us, and that was one of the sessions. What's the best way to hit the buzzer? What's the fastest way to hit the buzzer? And but yeah, it was fun. It had a little more. I don't know. It was a little more intense because buzzer speed mattered. It was how fast you were the buzzer.
Now it's pretty much thumb or finger.
Finger.
Pretty much the only two ways, and people still argue about that. So
I know we're going to talk about the adult tournament later, but I noticed whenever I quiz with these buzzers today, I have to get down and get flat to get the best buzzer speed. If I sit up, I'm not as quick on the trigger as I am if I'm like that.
Interesting. Hey, everybody's different, and everybody's got to figure out what works for them. And there's definitely some interesting ones. So you see, there's so many. I'm gonna have to name some names. But kids like Caleb Beardsley. I know Caleb watches. Leaning over the table is kind of a signature thing, and then some kids you see them jump like really hard, and then I never really had noticed it before, so I don't know if it's like new for him or not, but Ryland Faubert, if you're watching, shout out Ryland, love you kid. He I don't even see him move at all, like flinch. He just kind of got it under here, and he doesn't move. Everyone else moves, and and it's his number, whatever it is. And I'm just like, he didn't move. He didn't even flinch. Didn't do anything.
That's the way my oldest daughter, she doesn't even flinch. You can't even tell that she's hit the buzzer. But back in the 90s, and when we had these slap buzzers, you would see people walking around with these, well, kids today probably don't even know what phone books are, but the big old yellow pages. There would be two of them or more, depending on the size of their city, but two of them taped together, just bound with duct tape all over. Carrying these people, they basically had booster seats that they sat on to go when they got to the quiz board. They'd sit on these booster seats so that way they'd have a little more height advantage. It took the weight off their arms and moved it up, and so they'd be a little quicker on the trigger.
Do you know when they went to the handheld? Because they kept with the box. They kept with the same box, but they went to the buzzers, right?
I was out of quizzing from 1999, I think, to 2010, and when I came back, they had the box buzzers. I think it was around the early 2000s, but I'm not sure.
I quizzed in 2003, and we had and it seemed like it had been that way for at least a couple years. So
right.
Maybe 2000, 2001. I'm guessing. I'll have to try and research that and figure that out.
That was my guess as well. 2000, 2001, something like that.
And then after I quizzed, it was a number of years. I started coaching in 2012, and when I showed up, they had this whole new buzzer system, which through the computer, which is great. It took back in the day, you had to have a timekeeper, and you had to get a quizzer to sit up there and clear the buzzer and say red 3, and or read to, and
Right.
definitely, took the jobs of multiple people and just automated it, which is
Absolutely.
a lot
That was
easier.
that was when we talk about differences between then and now, we don't need as many people these days to officiate a quiz tournament. Back then, you had the tape recorder, which I know they still have that at nationals. They have it's not a tape recorder anymore; it's just the recorder.
I
But you
remember
had
the
the tape
tapes.
recorder.
Got to flip the tape over.
Yep, exactly. You'd hear it go off in the middle of your question, and you'd be like, "Yes, I could say anything I want right now." They can't prove it.
I do remember that. I do remember them. It had the cassettes. Kids, if you don't know what a cassette is, I'm sorry. Look it up. But yeah, it's stopping. You have to flip it over the other side, and you had to have extra tapes. And I remember that. And all the scores were hand. People writing
Right,
scores.
and usually two, because inevitably somebody couldn't do math, and so you had two people up there at the scorekeeper's table to make sure that the score was right. You had the timekeeper.
Mm-hmm.
Now sometimes the tape operator would double as the timekeeper, and then you had to have a foul judge at every tournament. I know most of our local practice tournaments we don't have an official foul judge. I know they do at nationals, but I don't even think we had one at Extravaganza.
We didn't
But
either. Yeah.
you had to have one because you had to have someone monitoring whether or not that hand was past the line or not.
Hmm.
So, and then like you said, the buzzer clearer. Somebody had to clear the buzzer. So all of that, it took 10 people to officiate a
Man.
quiz
Gosh.
tournament.
And then on top of all that, to calculate all tournament scores and everything else, they had to get all that by hand for average out everybody's, everybody won 2 quizzes.
Right.
Oh yeah, things have gotten more efficient.
Yeah, and obviously, back then it wasn't equivalent average or percentage or anything like that. It was just that made it a little bit faster because you could kind of do it as you go because it was just the amount that they scored in that quiz.
And today, we also have UPC quiz, and we can actually kind of keep an eye and keep track of everybody across the nation more
Right.
so. So that had to completely change quizzing completely. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, when you got to nationals, you only knew teams based off of if you had seen them before that year or if you'd seen them previously. And I mean, that's some of that still is true today. I mean, we know who's won nationals the last 2 years and intermediates and experience. And that's another thing. Back then, and I know beginners is kind of new, and I know even the intermediate division is kind of new, but you just had one division at nationals. You had senior quizzing and you had junior quizzing, and it was just one division. Didn't matter what age you were. If you were 12 years old, you were quizzing against 18-year-olds. And yeah, so I like the new, the way it's going. I like a lot of the changes that have been made over the years, and I think it's for the best. It kind of keeps more people involved and helps them.
I agree. I think it's best for the growth of our quizzers and for them to stay motivated. And I think the technology advances are obviously wonderful. I'm interested to see in 10 years, we look
Right.
back, then we'll be, this will be the old days, and how it'll be different then. That'll be really interesting.
Another thing I thought of when you were saying, explain what were some of the differences. The extravaganza qualification for now, the teams that qualified for nationals at extravaganza. When I was quizzing, it seemed like the rule was if you finished first or second at extravaganza, then your team semi-qualified for nationals. And what I mean by that is, let's say we had a district. Our district usually had around 10 teams in the mid 90s, sometimes less. And let's say we had 8 teams. Well, we had my brother. They did have a novice division at extravaganza during like 95, 96. and that meant novice division was your first 2 years of senior quizzing. This was only at Extrav.
Hmm.
But if you were in your first 2 years of senior quizzing, then you could quiz in the novice division. And my brothers, I say brothers plural, the two of them plus their teammates, they finished first, I believe, at the extravaganza. And so their team was kind of qualified for nationals. And what I mean by that is I think we had 8 teams at district finals that year. So as long as their team finished third, then our district could send 3 teams. But if their team finished first or second, we could only send 2. And if their team finished fourth or less, they didn't get to go. They had to finish one spot out of whatever was, whatever was allowed to go from that district.
Oh man. Oh, I definitely appreciate the new Extrav rules, because that's, if I remember correctly, gosh, I remember it being different for sure. And I do like that they added, okay, if there's 32 or 25 teams, top
Right.
3, 32, top 4, that's great, because some of these Extravs, like especially South Central, was so large, so competitive. It's definitely deserving for more of those teams to get to go in the top teams.
Well, then they changed it after that deal. They changed it to where, and there may have been a change in between. Like I said, I was out of quizzing for about 10 or 11 years, but they changed it to where the district got awarded a spot.
So but you didn't qualify, but your district got an extra spot.
Right.
I think that's how it was when I was a quizzer. I think if you had 8 teams, one of the teams won Extrav, your district gets 3 teams to go, and it doesn't really matter if you don't make it or not.
Right.
Because I had heard stories of teams that had won Extrav and then didn't make national. I mean, I can't imagine the heartbreak that could.
Yeah, and that happened. I think that change happened just 5 or 6 years ago, where your team, if it qualified or if it won Extrav, that team was qualified. And then, like you said, the last 2 years or so, they've expanded it.
I'm a fan. I'm a fan of the rule.
Me too. I like the rule changes. They've all, at least what I've seen, almost all of them have been beneficial to quizzing, and it's more about keeping more kids involved. And to me, that's what quizzing is about.
Exactly. So what about questions? What about, at least from seniors? I know you didn't quiz juniors. So from senior side, do you feel like there's been a big shift in the question writing or the question styles or different types of questions that you never would have seen back then that you're seeing now, or questions you saw then that you definitely wouldn't see now?
That's a hard one for me, Philip. I mean, I remember that there being difficult questions. The way we attacked questions as a quizzer back then or attacked quizzes, is we were pretty aggressive, and we just counted on the fact that there were going to be 2 to 3 questions per quiz that probably shouldn't be interrupted. And we just played the odds. We figured, well, if there's only 2 or 3, we're going to go after all of them. And if we miss those 2 or 3 and we get the other, 17 or 18, we're fine. So that's the way we quizzed. So, I think it's probably still pretty similar in that regard. There's some questions where you kind of have to wait, or you're stuck picking between 2 different ways it could have went. Now, I do like what I've seen in senior quizzing, and I'm just talking about senior quizzing right now. I'm not talking about junior quizzing. Those key words, man doth not live how, but how, or man shall not live how, but how. That shall and that doth, that really matters. And if you're not paying attention to it, you might go to the wrong verse. But if you're paying attention, you pick up on it, then you'll know which one he's asking, or I say he or she is asking from.
Right.
So,
you did mention before, we had a talk before this a little bit, and you said that you found out later that the national questions were written differently, right?
Now, again, this is secondhand information, so nobody quote me on this. If I'm wrong, I will readily admit it. I'll admit it beforehand. But I heard or thought I heard a rumor that at some point the questions that were asked at nationals were written by a pool of writers. In other words, 2 to 3, maybe 4 writers contributed to a database, and then the quizzes were generated from that database. And so you might, if that's accurate, then you might get a question written by Philip Melder, and then question 2 might be written by Brother Knutson there in your district, and question 3 might be written by Brother Faubert, and question 4 might be written by Chad Nash. Who knows? You had all different question writers, and so again, like I said, I just heard that a few years ago, and I didn't know that as a quizzer.
That is definitely interesting. If it were that way today, that would completely change the way that teams prep for nationals as far as questions.
Right, you'd get as many question writers as you could, and we still do that. We buy from 3 or 4 question writers just to get varying looks at different verses. Since we don't get to hear Brother Faubert's questions till district finals, I think it's still valuable to get several different question writers. But if you knew who those 3 or 4 contributors were and they were writing questions, then yeah, you would definitely want to get their questions for your practices.
I do think, on that same note, I do think it's really good during the year to have different questions as well, because it teaches kids to be able to adjust to questions and to learn to adjust on the fly. Because sometimes you go to a tournament, like I believe in Wisconsin, they have 3 different question writers that they use, and nobody knows until you show up. And so to be able to adjust on the fly, to be able to listen to quizzes beforehand, to be able to quiz on them and make adjustments as you go, that's definitely a skill and definitely something that kids can develop. So if you're stuck with the same question writer all year, and then come district finals and come extravaganza, that's the only times you really have to adjust. That adjustments can be much more difficult.
Right. We've been to a lot of tournaments this year. I've taken my girls to several different out-of-state tournaments, and I'm trying to think. Let's see. I know so far we've had at least 4 different question writers in the tournaments we've been to, possibly a 5th. So yeah, it's been neat to see, because they've quizzed well, not placed at every tournament, but they've quizzed well at almost every tournament. So it's been neat to see that they can make that adjustment.
Speaking of, so I had noticed that you've gone to a lot of tournaments. So is it interesting quizzing in the South and the Midwest? And, have y'all really enjoyed traveling? And have there been, what's it like to see all these different people from all over?
Yeah, this year, I made it a point with my girls to try to make as many tournaments as we could. So in January, we went to 2 tournaments, and then followed up with Disney tournament in Orlando, and then we had our February tournament here, and then we went to Chase Marshall. And I try to make that tournament every year, as much as I can. I try to make that tournament because I just think it exposes us to the North Central teams, where we don't normally get that unless we go to that tournament. And I like for my quizzers to see other teams for, one, for the fellowship, but also as far as the competition standpoint, I like for them to be aware of who they're quizzing. When we get to nationals, they're going to know, okay, oh, that's that team that we saw at Chase Marshall, or that's that team we saw in Orlando, or wherever it was, the Texas Louisiana Open, wherever it is. And so they're more aware of who they're quizzing. And that's one of the things that when I was a quizzer, we traveled to Texas and Louisiana as often as we could because we wanted the extra competition and to kind of get better. We felt the competition would help us get better. And starting out, I mean, Texas and Louisiana walked all over us. But then we got to where we could kind of hold our own. And I think it just sharpens the quizzer skills if you can make those types of trips.
I agree. I early on when I started coaching and our quiz program was growing, our quiz program was relatively, I mean, it was pretty much brand new. So I kept pushing to go to these bigger tournaments because, and it wasn't really in the budget, and it wasn't something that we normally did. So there's a little bit of pushback, and I'm like, guys, we need to go to these things because it simulates the pressure and it simulates the bigger deal. And that way, when you get to Extrav, when you get to nationals, they've been there before, right? It's not the first time they've been in a bigger tournament with the different officials. It's unfamiliar, but they're used to quizzing in unfamiliar scenarios in tougher competition. So
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, please.
No, one of the reasons, like one of the things I learned as a coach, I was going to say I failed at, but one of the things I learned as a coach with when Natalie was in beginners is we made the quarterfinals of nationals. I think it was her last year of beginners, and you go into, she's used to quizzing in this room, and then you go into the quarterfinals and they've opened up the room to allow more seating. So now it's this big, huge room. And remember, she's 8 and the other quizzer on her team's 7. And they've got the camera there live streaming, sitting right out there in front of you. And so one of the things I learned is, okay, they need more exposure to those bigger type of environments, And this year they got that. I mean, I had never been to Alexandria before, and I've been there 3 times this year. So,
wow. Well, yeah, and that's you don't find many bigger auditoriums than that as far as churches. Growing up there, it's funny because it didn't seem big at all, and then you move away for a few years and you go back and you're like, geez, has it always been this big? But I would love to quiz there one day. It's tough for us to make it down. We did make it down to the Bayou Blast, 12-hour trip. We drove 12 hours on Friday, 12 hours on Sunday. So that was exhausting, but totally worth it. We had a blast. But I agree. For any of you younger programs or coaches that are kind of questioning if you should go, the bigger tournaments are definitely worth it. And there's a number of them, the Show Me, the Chase Marshall tournament, the Louisiana, Texas Open, the Walt Disney tournament. There's
I know you're a Louisiana guy, but it's the Texas Louisiana.
Oh, okay. I apologize. You seem a little bit biased from me. I'm sorry.
No, I would just hear it from our coordinator if I didn't correct you.
Okay. That's awesome. All right, so moving on.
Actually, wait. I got
go ahead.
More things that I made notes about. A couple more differences between back then and now. Back then, Nationals was held with General Conference.
Yeah, that is a big difference.
Leading into General Conference. So we always made our big push in the summer. Like we were not the team in May that we were in July, because those 2 months, my parents both worked, and we weren't. I don't know what the real reason was. If they told us it was because they didn't want, people driving by to see that we were home alone since there wasn't a car there, or if it was really because they were just wanting us to stay inside and study all summer long. But while they were at work, we were studying. I mean, that was, you hear about those quizzes. Man, we studied 6 to 8 hours a day, blah, blah, blah. We really did.
Wow.
During the summer. During the summer, there were 3 of us, and we would sit there with I don't know if you know about the game of washers, but we would sit there and we would play washers. And one of the brothers would be sitting on the couch reading out scripture references while we sat there and threw washers and quoted. And then we would switch, we would rotate, and then the other one. And that, I mean, so we were hearing it twice and quoting it once.
Well, if anything, I'm sure you got really good at washers.
We yeah, camp champions, man.
Oh man, that's awesome.
And then the other thing was back then the cutoff was June 1st. It was your birthday or your age on June 1st, not January 1st.
Oh.
If it had been January 1st, I could have quizzed another year.
I'm sorry to hear that. The age cutoff is always interesting because at the younger ages and juniors, I always find that, 9 months can make a big difference with the kids' cognitive, ability and just thinking quicker and being able to memorize more. And it's always interesting to see the younger ones, and you could tell which ones, are they a January birthday or are they like a November birthday? You can kind of tell. That's always interesting. But I mean, I think January 1st there's not
it makes
anything
sense.
better. Yeah, I would agree.
It makes sense.
All right. So we talked about how you had quiz before. So once a year, you get to dust it off and get back into it, right? So you coordinate and totally was this your idea, your baby, the Over the Hill adult tournament in College Station?
Yes, obviously I had seen other Over the Hill tournaments done before, but nothing on a regular basis, every year. So a couple years ago, I was like, man, I was talking to a few other people, Chad and Rick Perry, Chad Nash and Rick Perry, and like, well, we could do a tournament. I mean, if you guys are willing to drive over here, I can put together a tournament. And so we did that, and we had 5 teams, I think, that year. One team came from Louisiana. It was kind of a combined team. Gavin Conley, who some of y'all know, was on that team. And my buddy, one of my quiz teammates, lives or goes to the same church as Gavin, so they teamed up and brought in Kellen Constant.
Mm-hmm.
And they came. So we did since there were just 5 teams, we just did a round robin tournament. My goal was to offer 2 different divisions: a junior division with junior questions and a senior division with senior questions. But we didn't get enough interest that first year, so we just did senior questions and did a round robin, and it was good, and we enjoyed it. And the next year, I think we had 8 teams, and so we just did a regular tournament. I'm hoping one day to have 10 teams, and we almost got there this year, where we can do 2 round robins of 5 teams each, and then let the top 2 from each come out and play a single elimination tournament.
That would be fun. Man. Yeah. I wish I was closer. That would be a blast. I would love to see if I still have it.
Yeah. Well, and we live stream it, so you can kind of see, if you're interested in doing it, you can go to my Facebook page and find it on there, or Victory Church Facebook page and find it on there. Unfortunately, at this past tournament, this was the first adult tournament that we do allow 1 quizzer, by the way, on each team, 1 current quizzer on each team, just to, that way if parents want to quiz with their children, they can. And this past one, unfortunately, the live stream cut off right as I was getting hot. And
well, you did go undefeated round 1, right?
Right, that's right. I won't tell you who I beat in that championship game.
Oh, okay.
He's an extravaganza writer.
Oh, okay. I think is it Chaz Napier? No,
yeah, something like that. Chad Nash. Yes.
Chad Nash.
Yes.
That guy, he came storming back. He was ready to go. I watched some of that quizzing, and it was pretty intense. I gotta say, it was just as intense as regular quizzing.
That's right. He got us twice in the championship game. So he got the last say. But one of the things that we learned in that first year on that Over the Hill tournament was the role reversal. You as a coach, if you haven't quizzed, or if you haven't quizzed in a while, you don't know, or you've forgotten the pressure and how fast 30 seconds goes by when you're a quizzer.
Mm-hmm.
When you're a coach, it's like, come on already. You have all day to answer this. But as a quizzer, when you're searching through, okay, which verse is that? Is it Isaiah 45:21 or is it 45:22? Or, you know, that 30 seconds flies by a little quicker. And some teams choose to have their quizzers coach them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good experience for the quizzers too, to realize, I don't know when to call timeout, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So they have to learn, they have to become familiar with that, and they get to see the other side of the coin as well. So I really like it. Different teams get different things out of it, and it's really fun. We just come and have fun.
Well, it seems like a really good time. If I ever get a chance to, maybe one day, I'd love to do it. It is a far ways to go. I'd love to do it one day. All right, so we're gonna move on to the part that I probably have the most interest in, and that is parenting quizzers, because that's obviously probably the most important thing you do. Is you parent your two daughters in quizzing, and you started them young, and you brought them up. So I'd love to talk about that. We haven't got to talk about that on BQChats yet, but I think it's extremely crucial, and one of the most unsung jobs there is parenting,
Right.
because it's so crucial, especially when they're younger. You're supposed to bring them up, just like Deuteronomy chapter 6 says. So how'd you get them started is one thing we'll talk about. How have you handled the daily grind of it? How have you seen them grow through quizzing? Like, from quizzing, what have you seen them learn life lessons? And how did they handle the junior senior transition, which has been a topic here lately? I just want to know about parenting.
Okay. Well, like I said, I was out of quizzing from about 1999 to 2010. And in 2010, the church we were going to, it was time for, I guess it was 2009, the fall of 2009. The church we were going to, they were getting their quiz season started up, and so we were driving home one day, and I said, or one night after church, I said, "Girls, are y'all interested in quizzing?" And they're like, "What is it?" And I said, "Well, it's where you learn Bible verses, and then they ask you questions over it, and you get to answer them, and you get on a team, and then you quiz against other teams, and you just, it's fun." And my 7-year-old, she's like, "I don't think so." And my 4-year-old was like, "I do." She didn't even know what it was, but she's like, "I do." I said, "Well, Natalie, you're going to need a teammate." And so Addison reluctantly said, "I guess I'll do it." And they did. I didn't know what to expect. Like I said, I started quizzing when I was 13, and so I did not know what to expect out of a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. And so I was like, "Well, we'll just go into it, and we'll see what happens. And whatever happens, happens. I'm not going to get too anxious or too into it or whatever." So that year, it was Acts, I believe, and my 7-year-old ended up learning. I think she was less than 20 verses from finishing the material, and I thought, okay, well, that's good. But what really impressed me was my 4-year-old learned 100 verses.
That's awesome.
Word for word, yeah, and she knew them, and she mostly learned them by listening to her sister. But then when I realized she was learning them, I was like, well, I'm not going to let this go to waste. We need to review her on those verses she's learned, not just let her kind of know them. Let's go ahead and review her. She knows them. Let's take the time to make sure she knows them. And so that's what we did. And I coached seniors that year, and so I didn't get to coach my girls that first year. And the next year, I was like, "There's no way I'm letting that happen again. I'm coaching them next year if there's any way possible. I'm at least going to be at all their tournaments. I'm not going to be off somewhere coaching somebody else's kids and missing my own kids, quiz meets. That's especially because they did so well. Addison, her accuracy was really high. Of course, she didn't interrupt, but her accuracy was really high. And as I said, there's ways to get her better. And so the next year we started learning how to interrupt a little bit, just kind of just watching other people. And I didn't really start dissecting questions or anything that year. My goal that year was to make sure both of them learned all the material and to get them a little faster on the buzzer, a little more confident, that kind of thing. So that was the goal that year. The next year, we moved to Texas. And I knew going to Texas that there was going to be a bigger number of teams and more teams that knew all of the material than in the district that I was quizzing in. So I just told them from the very beginning, we're going to go down there, we're going to do our best. We haven't made nationals yet, but we're going to go down there and we're going to do our best, and we're going to really get into it. And I felt like during that move from leaving basically almost all their family, my dad was down here, but both of their grandmas, their other grandpa, their aunts and uncles, leaving all them and coming to a place where the only person we knew was my dad. I felt quizzing, at least having that and keeping them in quizzing, would help them, have something stable. And so we really got into it that year. I started, okay, we need to learn how to interrupt. We got to learn how to interrupt more than just quotation completion questions and locate this verse. We got to learn how to interrupt 1 parts and 2 parts and 3 parts. And Addison, there was no one in our church that we were going to that was her age. And so we ended up teaming up with Conroe Living Way, the Enzies church, the church Brother Enzie pastors. And so that was real beneficial for us because they had a history, they kind of knew what was going on, and we were able to learn a lot from them. One of the things that we learned from one of the families there was, she said, the Bible doesn't tell me to get my kids an education. It doesn't tell me that I need to, I have to educate them. But it does tell me that I have to teach them diligently the Word of God. And so, that became our focus. And so every single day we studied every single day. And it was 7 days a week. We quoted all the verses that we knew and learned some until we knew all the verses. And both of the girls' teams that year made nationals. And so that kind of just solidified, okay, what they preached to us, in that program, we've got to carry it on as we continue through our quizzing, quote unquote, careers. And so we've pretty much done that. It's an everyday thing as a parent, especially with your beginners and juniors. You've got to do it every day. And if you don't do it every day, it becomes really time consuming and difficult. But if you do it every day, then your review time actually goes down as your study time grows, and then after you've learned it all, then it starts coming back down as you review, because the quizzers get quicker at recall and at quoting. But if you don't do it every day, it just when you do review, it's painful.
Yeah, I've been there, done that. Yeah, I completely agree. I've tried to explain that to parents. It's just like, you don't understand. You're actually saving time by quoting every day. In the long run, you're going to save yourself time. They're going to know their stuff so much better, and they're going to fly through it, and they're going to know it so well that it's not going to be painful. It's going to be just smooth and fluid, and they'll get through it and study well.
So even on days like now, it's like last year, for instance, when it was Galatians and Hebrews and we could straight quote, if there was a day that I couldn't sit down with them both physically, and we're talking about 400 and 500 verses now, not 200 and 300. Even if there was a day I couldn't sit down with them physically, if we got a 15-minute drive to church, we would try to, I would just rotate. I quote verse 1, they quote verse 2, or, Addison quote verse 2, Natalie quote verse 3. I quote verse 4, Addison quote verse 5, or Natalie quote verse 6. And we would just rotate through the material that way. And then the next time we had to do that, Addison would start verse 1, Natalie 2, me 3. And that kept us, even on those days where it just seemed like there wasn't enough time in the day to get it all done, we were able to get something done.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned to you, I don't know if I've covered it in this podcast or not, but I work 12-hour shifts. So I might go into work at 5:30, get off at 5:30, and church is at 7.
Mm.
Well, that doesn't leave very much time for me to review them. So at this age now, I do lean on them a little bit on the stuff that I know they know to quote themselves. But then whenever for instance, at the end of this week, when I review them, I got to expect that there's going to be some stumbles and there's going to be some untwos instead of twos or something along those lines. Now, there's apps and stuff out there these days where you can quote it into the app and then, you can listen to it later or whatever. That helps. They're doing, I think Sister Wilson has that app, and she's doing what she can to help us in these busy times.
Mm-hmm.
And so, take advantage of those tools that are out there.
Right. So how have you seen your girls grow? Like, have you seen quizzing change their lives in ways?
Yeah. So obviously one of the main reasons that I love quizzing is because last time we did doctrine, which was, I guess, our first year here in Texas, it's that same year I was talking about, Addison memorized verses where it talked about, how we dress and women cutting their hair and, and things like that. And as a 9-year-old, she was learning it one day and she's like, oh, that's why we do that. And it was just like, yes, yes, you see it for yourself. She got the revelation at 9 years old. And so that to me is the most important part of quizzing. So that revelation, and as they study Romans and, have to read it in a different translation to understand it and, things like that. And they get it, that you see the light bulb turn on. That is how I look for them to grow and hope that they grow the most. Now, obviously, I've seen them in other ways benefit from quizzing. Addison's very shy. She doesn't like to talk in public. She doesn't like to be called on.
I'm sure she's going to love you talking about her on the podcast.
Right. Yeah,
love you, Addison. Yeah.
They told me before, and you better not embarrass your daughters. Well, I'll try not to. But she's admittedly, we talked about it before. She's very shy. But you get her up to the quiz board, and even though she's shy, when she's answering, she comes across pretty confident. I mean, the confidence comes out. So she realizes that as long as she's comfortable with the topic and knows what she's talking about, she can talk to you about anything. And she's witty. She doesn't like to say her jokes out loud, but it's funny anyway. But she's I've seen them grow in that way, socially and just being more confident when they're sure of something. And obviously the other social benefits, the study benefits, they're able to pick up on things, understanding what the scriptures say and not just memorizing it. The other day, I think the Sunday school teacher said, did you know Jesus was ugly? And the people, the other kids in the class were like, what? And now he's like, yeah, Isaiah 53, whatever it is. He's like, what? Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, and it's cool. I love seeing their growth. And as they mature, like I said, when we studied Romans, we had to look at it in different translations to be able to understand it. But then she knew what it was saying. And so to me, that's the biggest thing about quizzing is that deep study more than just the memorization of it.
Did they make a pretty smooth jump from junior to senior? Because I know you had coached them for a number of years at that point, I assume, and you had to make a transition as well, which I did too. Which I know you were a former senior quizzer, so it was probably a little smoother for you and I than someone that never quiz seniors. But you had to transition to seniors and coaching them, and they have to make that transition as well. So
It was pretty neat. We actually took a year off from quizzing, and the year that we took off was the year that it would have been Addison's first year of senior quizzing. The next year, she got back into it, and we had at that time our quiz directors at the church were Billy and Heather Strawn. Billy is Brother Clay Strawn's younger brother, and Heather is an English teacher. So that was awesome because she was able to. She's a high school English teacher, so she was able to connect with the kids and help them in their studies and understanding the questions, and help me, too, as well. And so it was real beneficial to have them there to lean on as we made that transition, especially with Addison. Now, Natalie's transition was a little bit easier because she had been to Addison's tournaments and had heard questions over things she had learned asked in a senior way. And I didn't discourage that. I wanted her to listen to those questions. I didn't you need to sit down and listen to these questions and see if you can answer them till toward the end of her junior year, her last year. But I think just being able to be around it and hear them, and she made the transition a little bit easier than Addison did. But like I said, she had been around it for 2 years before she made that same jump.
Right, being able I'm sure she heard Addison at home too, and definitely the younger siblings have a smoother transition typically, I'd say. But that is a blessing for sure. We talked about it last week on the podcast, but it just seems like if you're mindful of it beforehand, while they're in juniors, and you can kind of just slowly bring it onto them so that when they get there, it doesn't just punch them in the face. It's easier for them to just kind of grasp everything and walk into it.
Right.
That makes it much smoother. Well, props to you, Dad. Your 2 girls learning all that stuff every year. That is something special for sure. That we should all try to emulate. I got 2 girls just like you, and trying to, my youngest started, so we're doing our best, and we're just trying to be diligent and going to grow and see how she goes. Now you said yours is shy, mine is shy. She is terrified up at the quiz board, but she's cute and she's having fun. So, and she's learning the word, which is the most important thing.
Well, Natalie, the first year, she answered one question all year long. Like I said, she learned 100 verses, knew them word for word, but she answered one question all year long. But it was a 30-pointer, and she got a ribbon for it, and she had bribed parents and grandparents out of $5 if she answered a question. So she got $5 out of it too. But the other thing I was going to say, I don't want to leave my wife out of this. My wife obviously helps a lot with this as well. If on day, we'll try to split it up. Sometimes it's like, hey, can you take Addison? I'll take Natalie, or vice versa. Or sometimes it's like, can you take them both for this week? But she works a part-time job and homeschools the girls, and so sometimes, as far as parenting goes, that takes a toll on you as well. And by the time you've worked a little bit, cooked or done their homeschool with them or whatever, you need a break as well. So, but sometimes you just have to do what you have to do. And sometimes it's, hey, I reviewed this much of it, you've got the rest. Okay. And it's sharing that duty, just like any responsibility for a husband and wife, sharing it.
one thing I've noticed is, and I've seen this with other people as well, but having more than one kid, I don't really know what it would be like to have an only child, but for having more than one kid, it seems like the kid really, especially mine, appreciates the one-on-one time with you, right? It's like it's just you and them, and you're working together, and that's special to them, because this is like our time together to work together. And they appreciate, especially when you have two kids and we're busy and we all have busy lives, and so I think if parents can kind of put it in their mind that this is like our one-on-one time, and you can split it up. You can, dad, you quote her today and you quote her tomorrow, but that one-on-one time nowadays can be so rare, but it's so special.
Right.
So it's good that, something like quizzing can, not only are we having one-on-one time, but we're spending time in the Word and teaching our kids diligently. So
that's exactly right.
Really special. All right, moving on. Talk a little bit about junior question writing. So you did mention earlier that you write for a ton of tournaments. I can't imagine. I've written for a few tournaments this year, and it's a lot. But you write for a lot of tournaments. So how did you get into this role? How have you been enjoying it? What have you learned from it? Tell us a little bit about it.
So yeah, I've written for a lot of tournaments this year. If you count each beginner and junior tournament separately, I think it's been 330 tournaments.
Wow, that's a lot more than I expected.
Questions for this year, yeah.
Woo.
So, but the way I got involved was through my friend Rick Perry. It was the year we were taken off from quizzing, 2015, I think. And he said, "Hey, I'm thinking about writing questions next year. Will you help me?" And I said, kind of taking the year off quizzing, but I'll think about it. And he, hit me up again. He's like, "Man, I'm going to do it, but I need your help." I said, "Okay, all right." You twisted my arm, and I thought, well, I'm not really going to be spending that time in quizzing with my girls this year, so that will allow me to kind of ease into this role. And so that's what I did. I jumped in and we wrote questions together, practice questions, and just provided them more as a service. We didn't charge a lot for it. We just wanted to make sure that people had questions that they could use. And, there were other question writers, and that's one of the reasons I was hesitant. I didn't want to step on people's toes, that were already writing questions. But I thought, you know what, let me just put it out there, and, people are going to buy from multiple people anyway. I buy from multiple people. So let me just put it out there. We'll put it at a reasonable cost and see what happens. And so that's what we did. And it was really, really well received. And so I did that with him for 2 years. And then an opportunity for Brother Marshall had previously written for, a lot of the practice tournaments. And he was going to be changing over to just the extravaganza, district finals, and nationals. And I saw an opportunity there for tournament question writing. And so I jumped into that. And yeah,
You jumped in with both feet, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, it's busy. You really need to get most of your questions written. Before I could write them kind of all the way through March or whenever our deadline was to get district finals prep sets out. But then you just don't realize the amount of time it takes to generate the quizzes, to get them formatted. Like I said, 330 tournaments over the span of about 4 or 5 months. That's a lot. And so I had to adjust my schedule to try to get as many of my questions written before January as I could. So that's what I did. And I've been doing tournament questions now for, I think this is the 3rd year. So I think I did 2 years of practice questions and 3 years of tournament so far. Let's see, 15, 16, 18. I think so. It may be the other way around. It may be 3 and 2, but yeah, it's fun.
I took it up this year for seniors, and I will say quizzers, coaches, whoever, just that once that if you just struggle with questions and interrupting and understanding questions, write some. Just, I mean, honestly, I've learned so much writing questions. And my mom has always written, not Bible quizzing questions, but she's always written questions when she studies the word. She studies a chapter and she writes questions, not in a quizzing style, but just for herself, because when you do that, you learn so much. And and for quizzers, I mean, there's a ton of reasons you should write questions, but for anyone, it's you learn so much, especially in seniors. I
Right.
know you do in juniors as well. The questions are very different, but you do
Yeah.
you do learn a lot in both. Um, but I
We
go
Go
ahead.
ahead. We My mom made us write questions as well. My mom was our coach when I was a quizzer, and she would make us write a quiz. And so each week, one of us would, not every single week, but there'd be, okay, Jimmy, I want you to write a quiz for next week's practice, and then we get up there and quiz master our quiz,
Hmm.
and it put you on the spot because then you had your buddies, down there. That's a dumb question, you can't ask that because you got this verse over here. Oh yeah, and so it kind of opened you, exposed you
Right.
there, all your flaws, and so that was fun though as a quizzer, learning how to do that, and I recommend, especially for senior quizzers, and I've done it even with my girls when they were toward the latter end of their junior years. I'd have them write a quiz, and we would ask it at quiz practice just for the fun of it. I said, I can give you the beginning of it if you want. Here's 15 references according to Acts chapter 1 verse 4, and Acts chapter 2 verse 3 says, and just let them complete it, and then I do that in a different way. Um, get into some coaching techniques here with a little insight to my interruption webinar. Sometimes when I've got experienced quizzers, I will go through and I'll just say, Acts chapter 2 verse 3 says, all right, give me a good question from that verse using that intro, and I'll have them do that without them hitting the buzzer, and we'll just alternate, between the 2 or 3 quizzers that are there. Again, these are 10 and 11-year-olds I'm talking about, um, not 5 and 6-year-olds or whatever. So it allows them to write questions without literally taking the pencil out and slowly writing the question and taking an hour to write 15 questions because they're having to think of it, and then their writing's not quite as quick as us or typing it out or whatever. So it's basically the same thing.
Yep. I do want to do that more this summer with some of my younger quizzers. Is just give them a verse reference. Say, give me a direct question.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a 2-part question, and just kind of get their gears flowing in their heads, because when you do get in the mind of the question writer, you can really start to see things where it's not as hard as you may think it is, once you kind of really get into that mindset. So
Right.
speaking of your webinar, tell us
Yes.
about that, please.
So in that same year, 2015, when I wasn't doing quizzing at home, uh, one of the customers, you'll know her, Krista Barley,
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
the Indiana senior coordinator now. She emailed me to order some questions, some practice questions, and I we provided them, and she said, "But can I get them with the slash mark, like where they should be interrupting?" And I said, "No, you can't, because that's not going to help you."
Right.
I said, "But what I will do," because I had already been kind of thinking about it, I said, "What I will do is I'd like to teach you, if you're serious, I'd like to teach you how to interrupt." And she said, "Oh, I love it." And so we got together, and I basically gave them the beginning stages of the interruption webinar. And I had already put together some materials for when I was teaching first year quizzers how to interrupt and things I'd learned from teaching my daughters. And so, I made a document called The Anatomy of a Direct Question, kind of just breaking down what all is involved in a direct question in junior, which is basically 4 parts. And so we went through that, and she's just like, she said, we learn our material every year. We always know it. We go to tournaments, and we just can't get to the buzzer because the other teams are interrupting and they're just beating us to the buzzer. But we know it. We can get the rereads when they come to us, And so then after that session, she said, "You need to sell this. You need to do something with this. More people need to know about it." You know how she is. She's very
great.
persuasive.
She is.
And I said, "Well, I'll think about it. I don't know if I really want to do that yet." I was still very hesitant. And just like I was hesitant that same year to get involved in question writing, but now I just jump in. People ask me to do stuff, I do it. But anyway, she wanted me to stay on and continue to help her son, Austin. And so that year through Skype, I coached Austin. My girls were taking the year off, so I spent 1 hour a week coaching Austin. And February tournament, they had 1 win, and Chase Marshall, 2 or 3 weeks later, they got second place.
Wow, that was awesome.
And so I was like, okay, maybe something I did actually help them. So I continued to work with them, and then that fall, or maybe it was early the next year, I offered the interruption webinar, and I do it at a minimal cost, just trying to make sure that people are invested enough to show up, and where I don't spend the money on the go-to meeting stuff. And so I charge a little bit just to get them invested. And then I offer in the interruption webinar, at the end of it, I now offer to watch, critique, coach, however you want to say it, one of their practices if they would like for me to. And what that involves is, if they want to it could be up to them. If they don't want the quizzers to know I'm watching, and they just conduct a practice, and I just sit there, with the phone that's on the back shelf or something, watching and listening, that's fine. Or I can completely take over the practice from Skype or whatever. Now, obviously, they still have to ask the questions because of the delay.
Right.
But I'll do it either way. And so that's one of the things that I do with the interruption webinar, because to me, this isn't just about my team. It's more about, we got to look at the big picture. And this is kind of, I know you wanted me to close with inspiring words, but this is kind of what it's all about. It's more about keeping as many kids involved in Bible quizzing as we can. And whether that's in your church, whether that's in your district, whether that's in the United States, whether that's in overseas in missions, which I can't help too much unless they speak English. But it's all about keeping those kids involved. And so the more enjoyable quizzing is to them, the more success that they achieve during quizzing, the more ribbons they get, the more, the better they get at it, at the game of quizzing, I guess.
Right.
The more they enjoy it, and the more they're willing to put in work and stay involved in quizzing. And so that's the purpose behind the interruption webinar, is to help kids develop their skills and kind of learn how to quiz, how to interrupt, and get questions correct.
Right, because if they learn the game, they're much more likely to stay invested.
Right.
And I agree. I have heard that in the past that there were some districts or some teams that were kind of like kept their cards kind of close to their chest. And like, we figured it out. You can figure it out yourself too. But it seems like we're growing, and that's not everyone by any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
But I know in our district and many other districts that I've seen that people are very open in helping, and we try to be. I know Illinois, this last 10 years, we've just exponentially grown. And the only reason that we've exponentially grown is because we've had so many people, so many great coaches that are so open to just open books to help and to teach
Right.
and to even travel to help in practices and teach kids, teach coaches. And that's important. I think maybe that's part of the reason why we're seeing an increase in our overall numbers.
Absolutely.
So I would love to see growth in some of our other districts that have a small number of teams. We have I got to meet a lady from Nebraska this past weekend that had a junior team,
Right.
and Sister Kirkpatrick. And
Yeah, I talked to her.
you did talk to her, and she was like curious about promotion. So I do want to do a podcast to kind of talk about, find someone that would be a good fit to talk about that for growing quizzing in your state when there's kind of a minimum number of teams.
Right.
So I'm looking forward to doing that soon, hopefully.
Yeah,
But
we can't seem to grow in Texas because they keep splitting our district. Same number.
Man, 5 districts, that's crazy. But
No, it's awesome though because I've noticed the growth in Illinois. You know, I think a couple years ago, as far as juniors go, y'all had the largest state finals.
we may be up there again this year. It's we have a lot of junior teams and beginner teams again this year.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about. I haven't really been keeping as close an eye on juniors, but yeah, and that's the reason we've been blowing up in seniors. We're planning on 25 plus teams for intermediate experience combined for seniors, which is
Wow.
like, I mean, 10 years
That's
ago we had 1 team.
right.
So it can happen for the districts that are smaller and growing. So
Yeah. I think that's about where we are here in Texas too. Is about 25 to 30 for the senior, intermediate and experienced, and I think around 40 for the beginners and juniors. So
I'm not sure about juniors and beginners, but it is awesome to see the growth and see that come up and see the quizzers that have fallen in love with quizzing and the parents, the
yes.
coaches, and it's been wonderful. So, well, brother Jimmy, this district finals is right around the corner. Some teams have even started. It surprised me that Indiana and
North Carolina.
North Carolina already had their district finals. I didn't know that they were starting so early. But this is probably, in my opinion, the toughest time of year for quizzing because we got school with finals and SATs and ACTs and all kinds of stuff. We're about to get into the summer. We're about to get into camp season. It's been a long quiz season. What is your advice to the quizzers, parents, coaches, the people that are pulling their hair out, going
Right.
wild with stress? It's right around the corner. People got to finish strong. What would you say to them?
Well, one of the things I did this year that I hadn't done quite this way is at the beginning of the year, I sat down with all of our beginner and junior parents, and I said, we went over some goals for this year. What is your goal for this child A, child B, child C? And included in those goals, I said, what's your material goals? Like how much material are you expecting them to learn? Because that helped us as a quiz staff to determine, okay, where should we place this quizzer? Which team should we place this quizzer on? What are our expectations for them? And then we also talked about, what's your spiritual goal for your child? And for a lot of them, at that age, it's for them to get the Holy Ghost, for them to get baptized, or just to start a prayer life, whatever it might be. And then what's your tournament at tournaments? What are you expecting from what would your goal be for your quizzer? And then what's your lofty goal? And so we went through all that, and then at the end of it, I said, you have control over only one of these things, only one of these goals, and that's how much material they get learned.
Mm-hmm.
And so 2 or 3 weeks ago, I sat down with them again, and we went through, and almost every one of them had either met their material goal already, or they're still within a few verses of making that goal. And so that to me was very satisfying. And then of course there was, one or two that had received the Holy Ghost and gotten baptized, and that's exciting too. But as the season winds down, just think about, what your goal was when you got involved this year. What was your goal? And can you meet it? If not, you've got however many more weeks to your state finals to adjust that goal and meet a new goal. Whether it's, okay, we're not going to know all of our material. We're not going to know, the 176 verses, but we can get to 160, or we can, in the next 2 weeks or month or whatever it is, and set that goal for your child. But then once you get to district finals, once you get there, remember that all these kids in your district have put in the work or have been working all year. And, don't get upset if another team makes it to nationals and you don't. I know it's disappointing because you want to go to nationals. You put in the work as well. But so did these other kids on the other side. So it's all about it's all about the big picture, stepping back and taking a look at the big picture, not just the one that's right there in front of you. Take a look at the big picture and realize that this is a ministry to your children, but it's also a ministry to the children across the state. And just realize that. And same thing for coaches. I mean, yeah, we're going to try our best to win and to make nationals. One of the things that I preach as a coach or as a quiz director is, once we've got the game locked, we lay off the buzzer. We rarely hit the buzzer. If we do, it's after we've given the other team plenty of time to hit the buzzer, because those kids over there have worked as well. And if maybe they didn't work as hard as you. Maybe they've only learned 20 verses, but that was a question that they knew, and they've got an opportunity to answer it and get a few points. It's not going to hurt you to sit back and minister to that kid, and allow them to develop that same confidence that your quizzers have, or whatever. So that to me, as a parent and as a coach, those are some of the most important things, is just remember that this is a ministry. And as a quizzer, you've got to remember that as well. Those are now your friends that are sitting across the table, and you need to allow quizzing and yourself to minister to them.
I've been trying to tell my quizzers this year that, we prepare with excellence. Whatever your hand finds to do with all your might. But at the end of the day, you show up, you prepared as best you can. You just have to trust that God will take care of it, and it's God's will. If it's God's will for you to go 0-2 or to go undefeated, whatever it is, He has a plan. And I think that whatever's best for you, whether that's to lose or to win, there's always a lesson in it. There's always something to be learned. That is important for your growth. And I know, right, looking back, there's times we lost and we didn't go to nationals. There's time, we won when maybe we didn't quote unquote deserve it because we maybe didn't work as hard as the other teams. But in all those situations, looking back, you can see the lesson that God had for us.
Right.
And you can see that with other teams as well. And so the best you can do is what, like you said, what you can control. Knowing your material, putting in the work, working hard, and then after that, it's just trusting God.
Amen.
So, well, Brother Jimmy, it's been a wonderful, wonderful podcast. I really appreciate everything you said. I'm really excited to get this thing out. It's the first time we've had someone with as many hats as you. You do.
I need them to cover my head.
You do a lot in the quiz community, and you've definitely helped it grow and become better. So, thank you for all you've done. Thank you for being on it, and looking forward to talking to you more soon.
Yes, sir. Enjoyed it.
All right. Absolutely. We'll talk to you later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.